The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Rapper Nipsey Hussle, actually much more than a rapper, entrepreneur, philanthropist, an emerging community leader. Nipsey Hussle was gunned down and killed yesterday at the age of 33, March 31st. At the age of 33, just outside of a property of a store that he owned in LA. I didn't really come to know his work until his most recent album, Victory Lap. But then I started to get to know who he was and what he stood for and what he represented. There's a lot to talk about in terms of Nipsey. Underlying everything is something that I learned. Well, the reality of when people die. As far as his legacy, as far as, first of all, before I even get into like the underlying arguments that are going on, which is what, that's just kind of what I do. I like to dissect the things that are going on around a particular story. But my heart breaks for Lauren London. If you don't know who Lauren London is, it won't help you if I said Nunu, if you don't know who Lauren London is. But Nunu, she always had the Nunu, but my heart breaks for her. They just did, together. They were a beautiful couple. They just did, interviews and videos and photo shoots with GQ magazine. And they were, you could just tell they were genuinely in love. But most of all, man, my heart breaks for his two children, starting this morning with a new horrific reality that they no longer have their dad. No suspect as of yet. A lot of speculation going on, and we'll just let the speculation go on until an actual suspect is found. I learned something when someone who was becoming my friend, we were friendly, but we were becoming friends at the time that she passed away, Erica Gardner. I learned something when she passed away. I learned that you can't control how people feel or what they say, or particularly online, their social media takes with regard to someone, especially if they ever felt offense or were legitimately offended by that person. I learned, I won't say the hard way, but I just realized that when public people pass, and you're participating in this social media community, particularly Twitter, I learned that it's often necessary for you to just mourn and grieve privately in your private circles, in your private DMs, and not really engage in what everyone else has to say. And the reason that's relevant in this conversation is for the exact same reason I brought up Erica Gardner. It's because Nipsey said several things on Instagram, social media in general, that were homophobic, flat out homophobic. And while he apologized for them, the damage was done. And so there are a lot of people, a lot of people who are bringing that up in this moment. And that's just what we do, right? In moments like this, I'm always reminded of Shakespeare, in the play Julius Caesar. The evil that men do live after them. The good that they do is often interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. I'm reminded by that because that's literally what happens no matter who, no matter what. That happened to Erica because of several tweets that she made that were homophobic. It's happening now to Nipsey, and it's going to happen to everyone. And, it was a little more personal when Erica Gardner passed away, because it was like, it's hard to explain, but it's not hard to explain. But when you're publicly expressing grief and then you run into people who are, in your opinion, in your feelings, in that moment, you have the right. I had the right to feel as though they were maligning her. That's just how I felt. And, in this world where, I don't know what you call it. I won't say politically correct by any measure. I won't say, any of those cliches of how we try to disregard people who fight for what they believe in. I'm not going to use any of those cliches. But in this world, I felt as though my feelings were just as important as theirs. And I still feel that way. And so I've learned, while a lot of people are bringing up the negative side of the homophobic statements by Nipsey, I've learned that, the mute button is very powerful, and not engaging in those conversations, because as much right as people have to be offended and bring out these things and to point them out and to do what I oftentimes feel is grandstanding, I'm not going to give you the perfect take today. I didn't give you all the perfect take when Erica Gardner passed away and this happened. I don't have the perfect take. I can just tell you how I felt and how I feel. And many times when you just speak from how you feel, sometimes you get it wrong. And you know what? I'm human as fuck, and I'm okay with getting it wrong. But if you could see me, like my hands did an extra statement. Like I finished my sentence and my hands were still going for more emphasis, but you can't really see it without video. That being the case, I've learned to give people their space. They have the right to feel and express whatever they want to feel, whatever they want to express. They were hurt by Nipsey. They were hurt by his words, his post, and they absolutely have the right to express that in this moment. And you know what? The rest of us have the absolute right not to engage in it, not to listen to it, not to participate, not even to read it, to completely mute it, because we have the right to grieve and mourn the way we want to grieve and mourn. Like, there's absolutely no legitimate reason for anyone who's bereaved, to use a church term. There's absolutely no requirement for us to participate in the negative reflections on the life of a person, because all of us are human. I swear, I am so grateful that social media wasn't around in my hyper religious homophobic stage, right? I just tell you about it. I wrote about it in my book, and I do that. I do that just so that you can know me and to understand how I emerged from where I came from to who I am. But I'm grateful that there's no actual evidence and proof enshrined forever on the internet. And I say that because all of us are screwed up, man. All of us have some politics that are really effed up. All of us have some issues that we need to be better on. And I bring that up not to whitewash anyone's quote unquote transgressions. I bring that up to say that every single one of us are going to mess up and have something that if we were public people would be maligned at the time of our death. And that's just it. That's just the way it is. But you know what? I do not expect my family or my friends or my supporters or my followers to give 1 second of their emotional space, of their mental space, over to people who would rather malign me, even if it's something that I actually did, right? People who would rather remember the negative things about me. I don't expect my followers, families, friends to participate in that or to even care that that is out there. So what am I saying? As much space as there should be for people to express their disgust with the homophobic past of Nipsey Hussle, just like they did with Erica Gardner, the rest of us have the space to mourn and grieve without any regard to that, because we don't have to be subjected to that. In other words, let's everybody just give each other space to deal with this moment the way it's best for us to deal with this moment. That's it. And of course, I'm coming from the side of being a fan of Nipsey Hussle and being a friend to Erica Gardner. And so, yeah, I do, it does particularly, it reminds me of when Erica passed last year, and it strikes a certain nerve with me. Like I said, I probably won't get this right, but the very best thing that I could pull out of this is that in these public spaces, when public personas pass away, let people say whatever it is that they have on their heart to say, no matter what it is. And likewise, the rest of us, we have the right to grieve and mourn privately and not be subjected to it. The evil that men do, lives after them, when the good is often interred with their bones. So let it be with each and every one of us. Let's talk some politics. Joe Biden. There's a lot happening with Joe. And what the commitment I've made in the 2020 cycle, the primaries and the general election, well, the primaries, is to give every single Democrat a fair hearing. Now, full transparency. I don't care who, I do care who wins the primaries, but regardless of who wins the primaries, I'm putting on their t-shirt and I'm going door to door, because as bad as the worst Democrat is, they are magnitudes of order better than Donald Trump and what the Republican Party is doing to our country. That's why I'm going to make my best effort in this night. It's hard. Some of these candidates are so ridiculous. It is hard to do. But I'm going to make my best effort to give everyone a fair hearing, give you the pros and the cons. I will tell you straight up that I overwhelmingly support Bernie Sanders, but I am leaning a little bit more and more towards Elizabeth Warren. And I just got to be true to myself. In 2016, I wanted her to run. She was my first pick over Bernie in 2016. I was thoroughly disappointed in the fact that she didn't, and then she didn't endorse him. So I do have disappointments with Elizabeth Warren, to be sure. But on policy, like, I rock with her. And I rock with Bernie Sanders. That being said, I just put that out there so that you can clearly understand my biases, but I'm still going to do my very best to give everyone a fair hearing, because if I can give you the pros and cons about Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, then you sure as hell know I'm going to give you the pros and cons about everyone else. And so that's how I'm approaching this Joe Biden thing. Now, to be sure, I think there are more cons about Joe Biden than anything else. I don't know why I'm having a difficult time saying his last name, Biden. I have more cons, and honestly, I don't even know if I have any pros to give you. But the best that I can do for you you know what it is? He reminds everyone of the era of Barack Obama. Really, that's why so many people support him. He's part of the last presidency. He was the vice president for a very popular president. So, I mean, it's not rocket science. But the reality is that Joe cannot run in the shadows of Barack Obama. He's going to be held to account to his record, his very long record that existed before Barack Obama was even on the scene. His voting record, how he comported himself, and, which takes us to this conversation, the very creepy videos and the demeanor. So let me start here. I was on the Majority Report with Sam Seder on Friday, and we had a great time. And he disagreed with me a little bit, because I was saying that, it was political malpractice for Joe Biden to discuss publicly the idea of making Stacey Abrams his running mate without getting the okay from the Abrams camp. Now, Sam pushed back a little bit, because he said, well, it's not, he doesn't think it's political malpractice because this worked for him before. It worked for him in 2016. It worked for him in previous races where it didn't, in the sense that it didn't backfire in the spectacular way that this Stacey Abrams thing backfired for him, on him. So, so is it really political malpractice? And I pushed back again and said, yes, it's still political malpractice, because you got to understand the lay of the land. You can't just put the words in the mouth of somebody, especially like Stacey Abrams, who is very competent and capable of eviscerating you publicly in a very, very embarrassing fashion, like she did on The View last week. So Joe isn't having a good week, or weekend for that matter. And the reason I bring up that conversation with Sam Seder is because of the mindset that Joe is operating in is based on what has happened and what worked before and what was acceptable before. You already know where I'm going with this. It was okay for him to suggest, in his mind, that he would have Stacey Abrams as a running mate because that worked for him before in the past and it never backfired. Likewise, a lot of people are trying to excuse away all of the behaviors that if we saw happening right now today, it would be a scandal, depending on, or rather whatever size that scandal is depends on the transgression. But the way Joe Biden carried himself with women in the past reeks of creepy uncle. Sorry to use that trope, but that really, it simply was. And maybe it was okay in his mind. In his mind, it was in a different time and it wasn't too long ago, but I said I was going to try to be fair, right? Going to try to give him the benefit of the doubt. These were behaviors in the past, like in the past 2 years, or at a minimum before the Me Too movement, right? Maybe we could use that as a flashpoint, the pre-Me Too movement and the post-Me Too movement. Well, what you did before the Me Too movement literally is not excusable because it is the reason the Me Too movement was necessary. It's the reason the entire Me Too movement is necessary. And can we just tote fair here? Can we just be fair? So many people who are defending Joe Biden's past behavior. And quite frankly, the thing is that if we don't tell him, apparently, if we don't tell him what happened in the past and what worked in the past will no longer work, then he's going to continue to do these things because apparently he's not capable of self-reflection. But I'm sorry, let me be fair. I'm trying not to, I'm trying to tote fair, but I mean, he should be able to make that conclusion for himself. That's fair. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it just because I'm trying to be fair to people. Like, he should be able to observe that his actions in the past that may have been socially acceptable in the past are no longer socially acceptable now. Just like if it was politically acceptable for him to speak on behalf of women prior to 2018 to 2019, it definitely is not now. And he did not learn that latter lesson. So I'm wondering if he learned the former lesson. But if we as commentators and journalists and political observers and influencers are going to defend his behavior, then we are recreating the conditions for him to do this type of stuff again. And I'm sorry, I know, everybody knows the uncomfortableness of a man hugging and kissing and interacting with you without your enthusiastic consent, especially when it's done in public and a woman has to give that. They don't have to, but they're oftentimes, like we just saw it with Beyonce at the Image Awards this weekend. When the guy from Power, Omari, I don't know his last name, when he kissed her on the cheek and then went back in for a second kiss on the cheek. And you could just see that level of discomfort that she had. Here is the biggest star in the world being subjected to the same thing that millions of women have had to endure across the country, across space and time, where men engage in their personal space in a way publicly. They do it publicly. And instead of them, I don't know, making a scene and slapping them or doing whatever it is that they felt like they should do in that moment, they just unfortunately grin and bear it. And then they bear the baggage of it for years to come. I'm sorry, everybody listening to me understands exactly what that looks like and what that feels like. Well, men, you probably don't understand what it feels like unless somebody has done it to you. Which make me pose the question on Twitter this morning. All of these men who are tweeting in support of Joe Biden, how would you react if he did the exact same thing? Kissed you on the head, smelled your hair as he gently held your shoulders in a public fashion, public or private for that matter, but these were all done publicly. How would you feel? Would you be tweeting in support of him still? I guarantee you would not. So I am as equally disturbed by Joe Biden's, all the videos that are coming out, as I am by all the people who are trying to defend him in order to not offer robust critiques. this is not even a robust critique. This is like just a common standard, like, men, I mean, I don't know. I'll talk about this in the next section, because the next section, I'm going to talk about this new report that shows how many young men are not having sex anymore. And there's just like, there are a couple of cultural things that really blow me away personally. I don't know. And I'm not trying to brag on myself as though I have always been this high quality dude who never, I'm not trying to oversell myself, but men, come on. At the very minimum, you absolutely cannot defend this type of behavior for the sake of politics, for the sake of anything. He's not even that good of a candidate. I know that was bad to say. You shouldn't do this even if they were a good candidate. But God, he's not even a good candidate. So it's like, what are you doing? What are we even doing here? It's not necessary. And it really sincerely undermines the entirety of the Me Too movement when you're so willing to put it aside and say, oh, that gentle caress wasn't that bad. Oh, that kiss on the head of a woman who didn't ask to be kissed on the head, it really wasn't that bad. Oh, him sniffing her hair, that really wasn't. No, it was that bad. And stop. And stop making special cases, like stop special pleading on behalf of Joe Biden or anyone else for that matter. I want to read you a Twitter thread from Christopher Ingraham, who is a Washington Post data reporter. And the Washington Post put out a report last week that show that young men are driving the decline in sex. I'm sorry, I am going to laugh quite a bit through this. I'm just gonna read his tweet thread and then discuss the data just a little bit, not really much, just kind of give some commentary on it, but then give you the commentary on a broader conversation with regard to Jordan Peterson, incels, and WikiLeaks. So, okay, here we go. This is Christopher Ingraham's thread. He said, a stunning chart. The share of men under 30 who aren't having sex has nearly tripled in the past decade. So a decade ago, I was 28. Yeah. So, okay. I just want to make sure I have my time frames right. He went on to say those numbers are helping drive a big shift in American sex having habits. The number not getting laid is at a record high. Conversely, the number reporting sex weekly is more is on the decline. Why is that? Why is it so high? Is a question. He said, I'm glad you asked. He said, young male labor force participation has fallen. Less work equals less relationships equals less sex. Alongside that, men in that age group are more likely than women to live with their parents, which presents obvious barriers to having sex. And then he said there might also be, I don't really want to read. Well, I'll read it and you could dissect it. He said there might also be a Me Too effect considering the drastic rise in 2018, but that's pretty speculative at this point. And the expert I talked to for the story noted that the rise in young men's celibacy was well under the way prior to 2018. And then he says, last one I'll read because I have a lot of jokes. He said, I see a lot of jokes along these lines, but married people are way more likely to have sex. For instance, only 11% of the married people didn't have sex last year compared to 34% of unmarried. So I didn't really want to read the Me Too movement one because, I mean, if it falls in the category of Me Too, it's not sex, it's rape. But I digress. So young men are out there not having sex. So let me read this tweet from that has since been deleted, but it is a tweet from WikiLeaks that was extremely well. Okay, let me just read it. WikiLeaks tweeted earlier, "Why Trump won?" ? Millions of young men stripped of romance and children, possibly by the post-2008 crash soar in wealth inequality, vented their disappointment via mimetic warfare against an avowedly feminist candidate. Who will harness this vast young army with free time in 2020? I'm sorry, guys. Wow. Are we blaming the fact that young men are not having sex on, or rather, are we blaming Hillary Clinton's loss in 2016 on the fact that these boys aren't out here having sex? I don't even know where to start, except for the fact that it becomes unfunny and grimly serious when you consider the incel movement that in past years has led to the murders of quite a few people. An actual incel standing for involuntary celibate. And then it becomes even more disturbing when you think about people like Jordan Peterson, who give an intellectual veneer to this condition of men who are so socially inept, in my opinion, that they're incapable of having a relationship with a woman that would lead to a sexual encounter. Jordan Peterson's giving an intellectual veneer on this, and the conversation when they were talking about enforced monogamy or creating a society that hyper encourages, let's just call it that. He kind of backed away. Jordan Peterson backed away from the legislative component of enforcing monogamy, but creating a culture that hyper enforces monogamy and extracts social punitive damages against women who are seen as promiscuous. Like, there's an entire twisted world that if you go down the rabbit hole, you see the psychosis that so many of these young men are dealing with, all because they can't get none. And instead of them reflecting on who they are as an individual and whatever might be their social awkwardness, instead of reflecting on that, they burrow into these communities, these online communities, and create these entire worlds where they dream and they fantasize about forcing women to be their concubines and to be their handmaids. And I finally got a chance to watch Handmaid's Tale, and the main guy, Fred, I forgot his last name, but if you look at him and you look at Jordan Peterson, you really have to pause and wonder if The Handmaid's Tale was like literally trying to portray Jordan Peterson in that role. But I digress. So here you have WikiLeaks. Back to WikiLeaks. They've since deleted the tweet, but it's like they're seriously using this data, using this phenomenon as a way of, I don't know, some type of political organizing around the fact that young men aren't getting any. I mean, it's all a big joke until you realize how deadly serious these people are and how much of this world and this society, like if you go to 4chan and you actually read the worst thoughts, like people try to dismiss 4chan, but it literally is the worst thoughts that these people have. And you see how these individual thoughts that are bad in and of themselves actually mushroom into entire communities that create an ethos and a thinking, a behavior pattern, a thinking pattern, and vernacular and catchphrases and inside jokes, an entire culture around the deepest, darkest, most disgusting thoughts that people have. In other words, 4chan takes the worst and creates entire communities around that. And there's an entire community on 4chan and even in Reddit where they discuss forcing women to have sex with them as not just in terms of rape, but in terms of a culture, in terms of legislation, in terms of like a society that eerily resembles Handmaid's Tale. Listen, that's the very serious part of it. And you see WikiLeaks, tweeting this and then deleting it in my mind, I view that as they're doing a full recruitment at this point. They're recruiting on behalf of the incel movement. That's the grim part of it. But then the lesser part of it, where I actually start laughing, is like, listen, man, dude, sure. Yeah. I'm struggling here. I'm struggling here because one of the things that is pervasive in those circles is their anger at the Chads, anger at the guys who just easily get sex. There's a lot of deep seated anger at guys who are just, gorgeous. They're tall, they're dark, they're handsome, or in this case, most of them are pale and they're handsome and they, they got the six pack and they drive the car and they can get any girl they want. And there's like an entire community of guys who are just so angry at them, at those guys, as well as the women. And I'm laughing because, there's the rest of us out here who, listen, I'm 5'6". I have been 5'6" since, I don't know, early middle school. I turned 5'6" and I stopped growing. And it's totally relevant to the story. It's relevant because at no point from middle school to now did I ever have a difficult time with women. I just never did, because something I learned very early on is that I have something that most of the sexiest guys in the world don't have. And it's something that we short people and then people who are not conventionally attractive and people who might be overweight or, all of us, we've all learned. It's to be interesting. Like, to be interesting is more powerful in most cases than a six pack, but that's up to the women to decide. But I bring this up because if you think about this community, you think about the incel movement, you think about these guys, the only thing interesting about them is actually terrifying. The only thing that they can actually converse about, they can only have a conversation about, is something that they learned from Jordan Peterson. And so if they ever get a chance to even get lucky enough to have a conversation with the girl, with a woman, they end up bringing up some of the most sexist, misogynistic, and terrifying ideas known to men, and that's the only thing that they can converse about. Of course you're not going to get any. I'm sorry. I hate to be that dude, but of course you're not going to get none. You can't, if I was going to say, if all you could talk about is video games, but at this point, if you could just actually have an interesting conversation about that, then you're actually going to come out a lot better than you would if you were sitting around talking about what you learned from Jordan Peterson and what you learned about enforced monogamy and what you learned from Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro. You guys wonder why it's it's almost like an epidemic. It's, I'm sorry, but do you know how many drop dead gorgeous women I've sat across dinner tables from, and they are absolutely fascinated with me because, and then I talk to them and I ask them why, because a lot of times I'm like, well, I used to be, before I got married. So I'm like, well, why are you even interested in me? And they say things like, it just blows them away to be able to sit across the table and have an actual conversation with the person, a meaningful conversation that's not riddled with pickup lines, that's not, saddled with freaking cliches and tropes and the worst that misogyny actually has to offer, or perhaps even worse, staring at a blank wall for an hour. How many times have I spent entire 20-hour days with some of the most beautiful women, in my opinion, obviously. I was 5'6", and I've always punched above my weight. I'm sorry for taking this time to kind of brag, but I just want to help these guys understand, I'm short, I'm fat, I'm black, I'm bald, and we ain't got no problems over here. It's never did, never will. Because there's so much more to all of this than whatever you're learning on the internet. My dudes, I'm done. I don't even have another way of saying this. It blows my mind that we are here. Like we're here where the data is actually reflecting that there is a incel movement and it is growing. And do you know how dangerous these guys are to society? Like they are the real terrorists waiting to be radicalized. And we have an entire community that is there doing the radicalization. And that community is not looked at as radicalism. They're looked at as just merely conservatism in the year of our Lord 2019. Now, add the fact that this rhetoric, like Jordan Peterson and all the rest of them, is mainstream conservatism, with the fact that you have so many boys out here who are they're just so uninteresting, and there's just nothing about them that a woman would ever want to have a relationship with them. Combine those two and you see how it's not so far-fetched. The Handmaid's Tale is just not that far-fetched.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.